Okay, waiting for the recording to start. It's turning. Yes, it's on. So, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on your time zones. I recently heard a greeting like good time zone to everybody in a very large corporation, and everybody was connecting from a different continent. So, good time zone to everybody. And we welcome you into our webinar about passwords or the lack of thereof. So I want you to meet our today's guests, David Turner and Marcin Szary, and I pass the mic to our honored guest, David, to introduce himself first. David, why are you here, and what organization do you represent?
Thanks, Adam. So thank you for having me on your webinar today. My name is David Turner. I'm the Senior Director of Standards Development at the FIDO Alliance. I oversee all the technical development activities and technical aspects of the operations of the Alliance. And I'm here today to talk about where we're headed with passwordless oriented standards and solutions, and what we're doing in the FIDO Alliance to help achieve that.
We'll try to get as much information from you on that as possible during the webinar. So thank you for your introduction. Marcin, your turn.
Hi. I'm Marcin Szary. I'm super glad I'm such a great company. So I represent the company called Sequence. Some of you might know it, some not. We are also a member of FIDO Alliance. So maybe I'll mainly listen to what David has to say probably, but I'll try to add a bit of my perspective on the topic. So I'm a CTO of the company. So I might get into tech details if there's a time and possibility on that. Thanks.
So I add from my part that while David is creating standards, Marcin is trying to implement them. So this is their role today in the meeting as well. So David, I suspect not all of our listeners are familiar with FIDO Alliance. Could you tell like 3 words about its history, composition, and what is actually the targets? What's the aim of the organization? Why it exists and what it wants to achieve?
Thanks again. So FIDO Alliance is an industry association made up of at this point over 300 different members, and we've been operating for about 10 years now. The scope of the membership is extremely broad, from all of the platform vendors to banks to consumer websites, to silicon vendors. It's a very expansive list of members. And they all came together to the FIDO Alliance because our primary goal is to make simpler, stronger authentication, and in particular these days to be able to authenticate and log on without the use of passwords, so that we have a much safer and much less fissurable environment, and ideally make it even easier to log in than people are doing today with username passwords. So that's the short description of what we're doing. We develop the specifications that underlie what the protocols and data forms that make the system work, and then get implemented by companies like yours.
Okay, so I'll ask another question to go a little bit deeper into the motivation and mission.
Sure.
If you wake up one day and you see the world around you without passwords, let's hope it happens. Will there be still a place for FIDO Alliance, or it will be just a success ceremony and let's close this because we actually achieved what we wanted to?
Well, that's an interesting question. I hope so then I'll still have a job. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those scenarios, and I've worked on a lot of new technology over the years, and ultimately the big goal is that you don't talk about it anymore, when it just becomes part of the fabric and it's just there. Nobody has to think. When websites first started up, you talked a lot about HTML and HTTP and these things, and people just use it now. They don't even give a thought. Well, people building stuff still do, but the users out there, they don't think about any of that stuff. It's just there. And to me, that's the ideal state, that the mechanisms for logging in just become smooth and seamless. they don't think about logging in the way they do now, remembering passwords and all that hassle. So that to me is the ideal state. And yeah, it seems like an inevitable conclusion to this would be that unless we find new areas to add value in the authentication space, that we could end up not having necessarily new things to do. It's a few years off. We still have a ways to go, but we're working on it. I see a notice I have an unstable connection. Shoot.
Yep. We have some distortion while you're talking or moving.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I move to Marcin now. Then because we have some phrases, some terms, some keywords that we'll be using today, and myself, I'm not very familiar. I wouldn't be able to explain all of them. So Marcin, as a technology expert, could you give us a quick walkthrough? I'll say web out. I even don't know how to pronounce it correctly. Passwordless, passkeys. Can you just help us navigate this vocabulary, like in short definitions, or at least how should we understand it?
Sure. Yeah, this is actually very confusing, and you're not the only person. You are an expert in the field, in a space, and yet struggle to understand the differences. I still sometimes try to understand deeply how those terms intersect. But basically, FIDO Alliance had first initially it created a standard called U2F, which was like an extra layer of authentication on top of the password-based schema. And so it gave birth to those first security keys. Either Yubico, I believe, were the first to build those, and then adopted by Google initially. Then it kind of the appetite was bigger. It was, as David said, it was not to protect passwords and to build something on top of passwords, but to completely eradicate passwords. So this is how FIDO 2 was conceived. And the notion was that you don't provide an extra factor, like a single factor, but you provide multi-factor in a single step. So that's where all the confusion is. So I have two keys, and they look exactly the same. This is not exactly the same, but this is U2F key, and this is FIDO 2. And so the first one actually gives you the second layer of authentication on top of existing password. The other one has more broader spectrum of functionalities, including like multi-factor. Again, that's going to be a single step, but by multi-factor. So you're going to provide either, in that case, a PIN to unlock the device, and then this cryptographically signed identity. So I think we lost David. But
we still have a few words to explain, so let's wait for him in the meantime.
So when FIDO joined forces with Web World Consortium, the Web Authn was conceived. So it's like a specific API in general. So the way to use those new standards. And I don't want to. I think we could get it like even deeper, but basically, a Web Authn is an umbrella. Web Authn is a thing that developers can access to build passwordless or two-factor authentication based on FIDO solutions. And there's this FIDO standard. David's back, and there's also a protocol called CTAP. But I don't know if we want to get that deep. So CTAP is a protocol that gives you the communication bridge to your either physical keys over USB or NFC. So it's like a really messy thing. I think that most of the either consumers or developers don't need to care that much about all the building blocks at the bottom. But Web Authn is, you can think of it as like a toolbox that you can use to change your app, to upgrade your app to either strong authentication, like extra factor authentication, or completely change the password-based ceremony to this multi-factor public key-based authentication. I don't know if I want to get deeper. Passkeys is a good term, but I think we will get into that. This is like a separate story. It's interesting, but I don't want to steal the conversation at this stage.
Okay, so David, while you were trying to fight with your connection and with a good result, as we can see, congratulations. Marcin was trying to navigate us through all the dictionary from FIDO to FIDO 2, leaving the passwords behind us. And when I once tried to get a hold of the moment that we started talking about the passwordless world, I stumbled upon, I think it was Bill Gates announcing in 2002 or 3 that we're gonna get rid of passwords. Last time I checked, it was 2023, and here we are still trying to get rid of them. And today we have the standards. Apparently, there's many keywords that Marcin already mentioned that are implementable. You could actually start using them, but it looks like we have some problems with actually doing it, with actually getting rid of the passwords, with adopting the new standards. Where are we in this process from your perspective, and what's stopping us?
So I heard Marcin's description, that was good. And as he said, the CTAP is what lets the computer talk to the keys that you were holding up earlier. And frankly, is not something that most site developers do need to think about. WebAuthn, as you said, is the primary browser API, which is where most of the interaction takes place. And I think the big difference in where FIDO has been able to become successful is there's two aspects for it. First, there was no alternatives. We said we wanted to get rid of passwords, but well, we added multi-factor, but that just made passwords harder because you had these extra steps. More secure, granted, but it was more work. And so there was no alternative. There was nothing to choose instead. And that's where FIDO's come along. And by being an industry standard, what that's led to now is adoption by all the major platforms, so that it's now built into Safari, macOS, iOS, Android, Chrome, Windows, Edge. And that means that if a service provider or a relying party wants to take advantage of this to authenticate their users, they can now safely assume that the client-side components exist. And that's huge, right? You can't roll this out universally if only some of the people you're trying to work with have it. And so that's where when we hit that threshold around 2019, when it first started being embedded, that's where broader adoption really started happening. Now, at that time, it was still based mostly on using security keys and some of the built-in authenticators in the platforms. But it was still a lot of it was still in the second factor model. So we still had a better way because the passwords weren't being used, but it was still taking that extra step. It's with the recent changes, and you mentioned passkey, that we've really been able to move forward, and mostly because of usability improvements rather than actual technical improvements. Yes, there's some technical bits underneath, but the fact that the website can now discover the passkey on your machine rather than you having to go through the steps to call it up means you now get a very smooth experience when you go to a site that's using it. Similarly, it means it makes it easier for the relying party because they can just say on their when they're doing the authentication that if they've got a passkey, use it automatically. So the whole user experience is significantly improved. And so now that we're at that stage, a lot more consumer-facing sites are more interested. The last thing a consumer site wants is to scare their users off, right? If the user sees something that's different, they get concerned, like, oh, I don't recognize this. I don't want to do this. And especially if it seems like it's harder. So these changes in the user experience, because of some of the technical changes, is really now encouraging a lot more service providers to start adopting it. And we've got eBay, we've got PayPal, Shopify, Kayak, the travel site. There was none. Oh, Hyatt hotel chain recently rolled it out. These are very consumer end user oriented sites, and they now see the value in this. And so it's going to be a rolling process as more and more relying parties see the value, not just in the password protection aspect, but in the usability aspects.
Do you think we're having this conversation right before a huge wave of adoption is coming? Do you see the snowball effect, or do you expect it? Because so far you mentioned like 3 or 4 brands that people recognize, and we have thousands waiting. So is it like if we repeat this webinar in a year, we'll be talking about great success and everybody will be having passkeys using them daily?
Hope so. When I talked about the strong support and the client, the other side of that we're seeing, and I'm here at the RSA conference this week, the big security conference, and what I'm seeing now is the vendors on the server side for identity management and site protection, they're now building FIDO, the server side of FIDO, into their products, which means if you're already using an Okta or Trusona or ForgeRock, those features now just become available to their customers. So that means that the threshold for the relying party to implement it has gone down, because they don't have to do much extra stuff. They already have a solution. This new feature's there. And so these are the extra steps that will help increase the rate of adoption.
And maybe I'll add to that. On top of that, I can see from the like developer's perspective, every major library for every major language, platform, framework that is dealing with authentication, you can look on GitHub that there's extensive discussions about how to implement WebAuthn into the authentication ceremony, not to scare users, as David said, but just to blend it gracefully. So it's happening right now. So this snowball effect might be like in a second, and from either those identity providers, as you've said, those consolidators like Okta, Centrify, or from the developers building apps right now.
That's right. And there's more, a stronger push is coming from governments as well. Most governments who are writing security policies now are specifically saying at least use some kind of unphishable authentication. And there are even some that call out FIDO by name as a preferred or gold standard for doing this. So in government and regulated spaces, they're now getting pressure or encouragement from the people they have to respond to. So you're getting, it's coming from different directions, which is all good, and it's generally all positive.
Yeah, so you painted a very positive picture, but let me try to to challenge it, because Marcin, if it was so positive, you'd be too busy to take part in a webinar. You'll be implementing it everywhere. What are the challenges of implementation that you see that have been so far present, stopping companies from actually implementing all these magic solutions that will get rid of password? Because everybody is interested in having that. Having nicer interfaces for customers is great for business. Why isn't everybody doing it yet?
So David painted a great picture when you can either deal with identity providers, so all of your business is organized around, like, there's a center point of identity that there's a single place of authentication, like you use Okta as your single point of truth when it comes to users. But in fact, if you look at the non-tech organizations, like either government or those from regulated markets like banks or other financial institutions, their infrastructure is not that well organized, and their history, you can see through their infrastructure, you can see their history of mergers, acquisitions. So it's like as if you were looking at the tree, you could see the history of the tree. So and that, I think that's the problem. So there is you can have Okta, you can have Microsoft or other identity provider that can cover, like, be an umbrella for part of your organization. But in fact, if you're a large enough organization, you have hundreds or sometimes thousands of apps built for password-based schema, and there's a legacy, there's a huge debt that you have to pay to change those. So I think everyone now, every CISO that you talk to wants passwordless, but there's a challenge. You have to. The projects are sometimes that if you like to cover your entire organization with passwordless, sometimes those projects are expected to last for years and cost millions of dollars. And so I think this is different stories on the consumer side, right? If you have a single application like Facebook, Dropbox, GitHub, you can just switch to passwordless, educate your users, and you're good to go. And it's different if you have this plethora of apps in COBOL sometimes, mainframe-based apps. Still happens. And
do you see that actually
I absolutely
customers...
agree, by the way. I'm sorry, Adam.
Yeah, no problem. Do you actually see that the customers, your customers, I mean the entrepreneurs, the managers of the companies you're talking to, they do really see the need for passwordless, or they just got the latest buzzword at RSA and they're going with it?
I believe most of them see the value in it. So we do a demo when we showcase them. So it's either internal awareness. Sometimes these are regulators pushing certain changes, right? But in most cases, these people they're like proper people on the proper position. So they know that phishing can be easily eradicated when they turn to FIDO. So that's one huge factor, and everyone is suffering from those attacks. So, but again, if you remove passwords from the equation, your help desk does not get so many calls. There is first of all, there's no shared secret, right? Password shared secret. This is like we tend to forget about it. But with FIDO, there is no shared secrets. It's not like so even when you use OTP based one-time passwords, there's still a secret, shared secret between you and the service. FIDO is completely different. So I believe if your employees are liberated from retyping passwords to every single app, they might get more productive. I mean, the friction was always part of the security dance, right? So and so those CISO have tried to manage those, make it secure, but at the same time, and FIDO for the first time, I think this is the first method I've seen that actually lowers the friction of authentication, not adds complexity to it. So yeah, it's like seems like all just pros. I believe there are cons to it. But yeah, I forgot the question, madam. But
Actually, if I could just add another benefit that's not directly tied to a security benefit is a cost savings. And I didn't even really appreciate till just recently. I was talking to a gentleman from Google, and he was saying that their SMS costs for OTP multi-factor is like it's a significant number on their balance sheet. You know, some services it's just like a rounding error, but no, it is a clearly measurable cost, and that's actually one of Google's motivations. In addition to the obvious security benefits, they will save real money by stopping sending SMS messages. So
they can always go Elon Musk way and say, just we don't do it if you don't pay for it.
Well, and that's why he stopped doing Twitter, or no, sorry, that's why he stopped doing SMS. He does the other mechanisms, but that's why he killed the SMS. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Yep. But I was going to ask you who actually wants the passwordless and why, but from your relation, David, it looks like everybody wants it. The governments wants it, the users wants it, the corporations want it. Do you see anybody on the market who is not actually for it, who is opposed somehow, who has some interest of keeping the passwords alive? Or is it like unanimous voice shouting, get rid of it?
So it's an interesting question. And what's interesting is that the consumers aren't asking for it, right? That they just do whatever the app does, and they, don't like passwords and so on and all that. But we've been doing extensive user experience research, and we've published a lot of that. We're about to publish some more. And it's really interesting finding the barriers that in many cases consumers may not like it just because it's different. And so they're, as much as they don't like passwords or they're bad, we now have a generation of young people who grew up username password, right? That you put, no matter what you do, you got a username password. That's the only world they know. And all of a sudden you change that interaction, and it's really disruptive for a lot of people. So that's actually one of the barriers as well, which is why we've been investing so much in user experience research, which we then publish as guidelines to help relying parties, understand what flows tend to be more acceptable, what's less disruptive and less jarring, because it's not that the consumers don't want the benefits, it's that they're resistant to a new way of doing things. And that's a legitimate challenge. In fact, many of the big companies I mentioned, like eBay, they've rolled it out slowly. They started off with, and I forget which order they did it, but I think it was on Windows users only in the browser. Because, as you know, browser experiences vary from platform to platform, right? The dialogue from Safari doesn't match the one from Chrome. And so they picked certain ones in order to understand the behavior. And, that slows deployment. So it's not just about do people want it? I've never met anyone who said, no, this is a bad idea, to sort of answer your question. I've met vendors who say, I've got a better solution. But nobody is opposed to the idea in general, that's for sure.
That's very interesting point. You mentioned the resistance to change among users, because no matter how good the change is, the new thing is always less wanted than the old one. And adding to it, for example, I run trainings and I can explain to even layman people how passwords work, how they are stored, how they are verified, and how the authentication and authorization process actually works today. And I'm not ready to explain how passwordless works. Probably I will be, but today I have no idea. And the unknown factor is always the one that we fear. So I think that you mentioned the user acceptance testing and general, the whole knowledge about what users expect and what they fear and what they accept is very appreciated in this area. But now asking Marcin, if users don't ask for it, why would enterprise will? That's because it's like with OT security, nobody's asking for a secure fridge. They want it cheap and cold, and that's it. Why would any company go in this direction if users aren't asking for it?
Yeah, before I answer your question, that what David said was really surprising to me. I thought that that if there was a large organization like eBay, when I thought they would start with mobile-based first.
I apologize. They may have started with that.
Okay.
My point really was they started with a narrow solution on one platform before, and it may have been actually mobile browser. I honestly don't remember, but it was a very narrow entry point.
Gotcha. Because that's what I thought would be the first. I would start with that, because if you are used to unlocking your device biometrically, you do it like unconsciously 100 times a day. If the same process, the same ceremony you take to authenticate to remote app, that would I would think that as a super streamlined process, and then for the first time, not retyping, password generating, but you just extend the same process you're doing over and over to authenticate on the web. So that was really surprising. Adam, why enterprises want password?
Yeah, if customers are not asking for it, why bother?
Why bother? You mean when dealing with workforce, or enterprises facing consumers?
Consumer facing.
Consumer facing. I don't know. Recently, one of the not just one, but few banks in Poland have recently announced that they are enabling U2F based extra layer of authentication, and I believe the reasoning behind it is to tell you that guys, we have this. We are secure if you are a security minded person, and then you can go to us. So I think that might be the opt-in strategy when you tell people this is available at our platform. No other banks are doing so. So maybe you would consider switching your money to the safer bank. I don't know. I'm just I thought that was my first impression when I heard about it, because you still cannot authorize your banking transaction with U2F, or right, and with
Which is so
still with
sad.
FIDO 2, I guess still is not ready to contextual transaction authorization. Correct me,
We-
David. Maybe
we-
last time I checked, it wasn't
Yeah,
ready.
we'll move to that question in a moment.
Gotcha.
So I put you
So-
on pause here.
Just to add to that, one of the big motivators is protecting their own reputation, because of course we've heard of database breaches and passwords being on the dark web. When all you have is the public key,
Exactly.
nothing can be done with it. So that protects, of course, it protects the end user, but it protects the reputation of the company too. I mean, the reputation's already in trouble if they got breached, but it makes the problem a little less bad. But also, one of the motivations from the enterprise or consumer-facing side is a very large online retailer, in doing their own research, found that the process of password disruption, whether it's successful or not, can directly impact the size of a single sale by 15%. That if someone is grumbling because they struggled with their password, they'll still buy stuff, but they'll buy less because their mood has switched. So again, it's a measurable financial impact on them. And so that's the added motivation to provide a smoother, more reliable approach.
So you actually magically answered my next question, because my next question was, where do you see it implemented first? And you've already mentioned on a meaningful scale. You already mentioned eBay as doing this, and now you mentioned the general customer-oriented sales processes. Is it the key player in here, or do you see any other verticals, industries that will be the fastest to implement passwordless, in your opinion?
Well, it's pretty varied. I mean, in Japan, we've got Yahoo Japan's rolling it out, and we've got the largest cell provider, Docomo, is rolling it out as a part of their D account program. In fact, I think it's already rolled out universally across all of their customers. It's funny because it's one of these things where somebody can go build it and we won't even know. So part of what we do is we try and find out when we can, and people in our community pay attention to the websites, and sometimes we find out because someone discovered it. They were going to log in, and all of a sudden there's something FIDO or passkey related, and then we share it because why would they contact us, right? They're just doing it for their own reasons. So big retail sites, they're definitely interested in this, but it's popping up. You get a lot of large enterprise customers who are interested in it as well, because it saves on help desk calls. Right? Password failures and so on. They're an actual cost when they have to call the help desk, and whether it's a consumer or a B2B type thing, avoiding that is always good. So again, there's direct monetary benefits in addition to the security ones.
Good
David,
point.
Adam, I wanted to add to what David said. And this is Adam, I want to refer to one of the comments that you received on your blog, on your site, and it's many people's concern. And David just said that we like David said, we don't even know who's deploying FIDO. So, and because FIDO was built around privacy, and many people, and even privacy-minded people are thinking, okay, we're doing this passwordless, and we're giving control to some third-party association who has the control, and they're afraid that those identities might be controlled by a single entity, which in fact is like completely opposite. And I think that might be, we might dive, if time we have enough time, we might dive deeper into this privacy field. I think it's super important. That's the first time, again, when the privacy was embedded into the specification itself. It was like one of the main pillars that this standard was built on, like security, privacy, and convenience. And sorry, that was I had to interject, but this is I hear it over and over. You guys, okay, you're doing this passwordless. Who's in control of those identities? And in fact, of course, Apple and passkeys may a bit distort that picture, but in general, when it comes to FIDO, you are the only owner of your keys. Every key is isolated, etc. Every identity is isolated. Yeah.
Okay, guys, you're painting like a unicorn with a rainbow's pictures, and let me ask a question that it's not that colorful. What are the three main disadvantages of passwordless and FIDO you could think of, if you can come up with any? You're proponents of the technology, so I'm not expecting you to start an 1 hour rant on why it shouldn't be implemented, but come up with something.
So I'll have to answer that in a relative context. So compared to using username, password, and even multi-factor, other multi-factor mechanisms. So one of the biggest one is the change, as I said before. So that the process for the most part is better, but as I said, the user behavior is a barrier to adoption. There's the fact that the drawing party has to change their code, as Marcin was saying later, that's not always an easy thing to do. Even though we're just dealing with the authentication portion, it's still cracking into something that may have been built quite a while ago, and so there's a high overhead to it. But most of the issues are what I'll call barriers to adoption rather than disadvantages, so to speak. Once it's in place, it is hard to say where there are disadvantages. I'd say one, though, is in some highly regulated environments, or when you have higher risk scenarios, it's insufficient. That there are extra requirements that sometimes needed to be added over and above FIDO. So you can still use FIDO as a password replacement mechanism, and it's really good. But in some cases, you need to have some extra layer, like transaction signing, for example, is something that's required, for example, with things like PSD2. And FIDO all by itself doesn't do that. And so that's something that needs to be added. So, FIDO is targeting the large scale password replacement kind of space. And so it's, I guess, a disadvantage, as I said, is it's not quite sufficient for some of the higher value transactions. Having said that, though, if you are using the keys like Marcin was showing, those actually can work very well for a lot of the higher value situations, but still not, say, for transaction signing. So it's insufficient, I say, is probably in some, careful using that word. David Turner says FIDO's insufficient. No. That would be very
already
bad.
Already noted. Too late.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think you understand what I mean.
Yep.
So I will extend to those keys. And then again, I hear it over and over again. If you want to use, so for example, if you want to be part of Google Advanced Threat Protection, I believe this is what Google program is named, and you want to solely rely on security keys, you have to have at least two. And so imagine having two keys. The idea is that you just enroll both keys on an application. You keep one key in a secure place in your safe, and then you use on a daily basis. You use a single key on a daily basis. But then imagine the adoption. Imagine you would have to enroll. You're going to create hundreds of new identities. So you have to pick the key from the safe, because those identities do not magically synchronize. And then enroll it back. So this is the pain. I think passkeys are trying to solve that. You pay the price of security, I guess, and privacy a bit, but then those identities can move around devices, and with keys, it's always difficult. And
I agree. Actually, that would be a disadvantage to raise if you're using the physical security key as opposed to the built-in. It's still better, but it's not a consumer-oriented thing. However, Apple recently rolled out a change so that they now recommend that you use a FIDO key, a physical key, to protect your iCloud keychain and use it for account recovery. So they recognize that for the day-to-day, make it easy, make it built into the devices. It'll use the phone to authenticate. So the day-to-day is good, but they also acknowledge, to protect the keychain that manages all that, go to the higher level security, have a physical key. And as you said, they recommend 2 of them.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yep. So this is something I'm not needed here actually, because you followed the script before I ask the questions. So I actually should shut up and let you talk. But you just introduced the next stage of our meeting, when I was supposed to ask you, why did we spend so much effort, we as the security industry in general, on teaching people how to use physical security keys as the second factor? Because like 5 years ago, if you ask people on the street, nobody will know what we are talking about. Now, at least in Poland, when I have a close view on the market, like if anybody's into technology, they already understand the benefits, and they probably have 1 or 2 even, or even more. There's plenty of companies giving them away in competitions to people. People are buying it. I even saw a few customers, like large companies, who already implemented it company-wide for every single employee, which was not the case like 2 or 3 years ago. So we spent a lot of time telling people, use a hardware security key in addition to your password. Should we now tell them we were wrong, we actually moved to passkeys, and please forget the security key you just bought? Or it will be like you mentioned, that there will be like 2-tier model. One will be the passkey that's invisible and in your pocket in your smartphone, and the other one will be for more advanced applications. I'm not addressing it to either of you. Pick which one will answer.
I think you just explained it very well. It wasn't that the first step was wrong. It's that we just made it better. So the security key model is the same. It keeps working. It provides all the same security benefits. We've taken it a step forward, though, so that it's more consumer accessible, that it can be built into your laptop, your phone, your iPad even. So yeah, you do have like a tiering of opportunity depending on what your risk assessment requires.
Yeah, I double what David said, and I believe consumer market will adopt those soft keys in a form of passkeys. But there are certain cases when you just cannot use anything but key, and attestation is one thing. If you are like a agency that really needs to know if they use valid keys, attestation is the key, non pun intended. But you can't have attestation. As far as I'm concerned, you cannot still have keys, passkeys attested. So attestation, for those who do not know, is if you have a key, if you buy a key from Yubico or whoever, or Feitian, there is a way for you to cryptographically prove that this key was manufactured by the manufacturer that you think gave you the key, and not swapped by some agency or a malicious actor on the way. And so that's since certain markets just rely on that, and that's one thing. But I think those may easily coexist. Security, and again, enterprise customers. Many people are reluctant to use their own private phones for the company needs. So the key is the only that they may use, right? They use those. They can use it over NFC, over USB, but this is the part of this is like the smart card that gives them access to physical locations in a corporation. So I think they will stay for good in those places, but who knows?
That's good news for me, because I have like 24 of those hardware keys at my home because of my job. I got them all the time from my friends, vendors, etc. And I wouldn't want to get rid of them. So the idea that we'll still keep using them in a foreseeable future makes sense to me. But coming back to the difference between a soft key, the pass key, and the hardware key, and the Google Advanced Security Program Marcin mentioned, will we be able to have multiple passkeys as well on multiple devices, like a cloned passkey from iPhone to I don't know, a tablet or iPad or whatever? Or several? Should we have a backup phone with a backup of our passkey, or will we store the passkey in the iCloud and believe it's safe there? Tell us more about how passkeys actually work, how they are stored, how they are created, because this is I think a new topic for many of our listeners, and somebody already asked, can we dive a little bit deeper into how passkeys are created, stored, and then used?
So
David.
the passkey is really just a simple term to talk about FIDO credentials. So there's the WebAuthn protocol basically doesn't change. We've just put a nice term on this password replacement thing, sort of said it that way. And it's not a trademark term. Nobody owns it. It's just a generic, like I said, instead of your password, you have a passkey. And so the process of creating one is basically the same. You register with when you register with a website, a key pair is created. The user keeps the private key. The public key is given to the relying party or the service provider. And then when you authenticate, challenge comes from the relying party. It's signed with the person's private key, and it's sent back, and that's the ceremony. So it's using public key asymmetric cryptography instead of passwords. That's the basic model. That hasn't changed. That's how FIDO's worked. FIDO2 has worked all the way along. One of the big differences is when we started talking about passkeys was the ability now to back up and synchronize those public keys or private keys, pardon me, your own personal keys. Because as Marcin was saying, that in the past you had to register with one site and then register with another and another, and each device had to register for the same site. And then if you lost your device, you lost all those keys and account recovery. It was a mess. And this is one of the other improvements that's going to help with consumer adoption. So where we are today is in, say, the Apple ecosystem. People using Apple are probably already familiar with the iCloud keychain as a way of managing passwords and such. Well, now the passkeys will also be stored in the keychain. And so now if I create a key with my bank on my iPhone, when I then go open up my iPad, that passkey is already there. So I don't have to redo the registration. It'll just show up and just work. And that's a big, big step forward. And again, a huge benefit to consumers. The same mechanism is in place today for Android. If you go between Android devices, that will work. Windows, Microsoft hasn't rolled that out yet, but it's coming. Some of the browsers and such can work a little bit faster. Windows has to update Windows to do it, but it's absolutely in the roadmap. They've committed to it. We're expecting it sometime this year. Now, today, this is the first phase, you might say, of the rollout of passkey. So you can't yet synchronize between Apple and Android, for example. Oh, and I forgot to mention the fact that the iCloud keychain is being used to synchronize. That means you also have a backup. So if you only have one device and you lose the device, you go through Apple's very rigorous account recovery process and you get back your keychain and you get back all your keys. So you don't have to redo them all. The other change that's happening is the password manager products out there are seeing opportunity and value because in the same way they help you create passwords today, they're now coming up with new versions of their products, Dashlane, 1Password, LastPass, that will create passkeys on your devices, but they already sync across multiple platforms. So they, in some ways, have an edge over the platform providers. And, I use a Windows machine, an Android phone, and I've got an iPad as well. Well, using iCloud keychain is not very helpful for me. So this is where, as a user, I'll pick one of those and use that for my synchronization. So it, again, just makes for a much better experience for me. Did I answer the question, or
you actually answered this question and the next one I was supposed to ask. Because I was supposed to ask what's the role of password managers then? Will they die a sudden or a slow death? But it appears that they managed to survive yet again. In the passwordless world, the password managers will still have a job synchronizing your non-existing passwords in form of passkeys.
That was a surprise for me when I saw the recent rounds, investment rounds for password managers, and I was super surprised. We are entering an era of passwordless, and then Bitwarden raises like 100 million. There was I don't know.
It's a vote of confidence for the new projects.
I thought, okay, well, there's something going on. And then when I thought about it, they are, they said, are like in the great position of becoming a bridge, like this roaming part across the platforms.
There's another interesting benefit that the password managers bring to the game, which is in the enterprise environment, well, and even the family scenarios. And that is that they already have tools to provide shared vaults. As bad as shared credentials are, there are still sometimes needs, there is a need for that sometimes, or you have to transfer credentials to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And they have systems in place now to be able to do that. And so they'll extend it, obviously, to be able to do the same with passkeys. So this is a value that's above what you'll get with the platform vendors. I mean, you know, for most consumers, again, the platform stuff will work great, but there's in terms of the password managers, they've got a lot of life in them.
Yeah, this is the benefit you mentioned, the possibility of actually giving somebody access to your passwords, even in case of your worst case scenario, is exactly the reason I decided to buy a cloud password manager, because I always used a local one and finally moved part, at least, so the most important passwords to the cloud, just to be able to set up a solution in case I go in a car accident and not come back.
Right.
Another question from our listeners. Thank you for that. Can we back up the passkeys, for example, to a YubiKey, or I'll extend it to any other device? Can we ourselves create a backup? Can we export it?
So some of that is a vendor question, and it depends on how they build their systems. I do know that, again, the password managers have already started a process where they're trying to standardize a way of securely being able to move data between password managers. They recognize that, you know, lock-in isn't good even for their own product. And so say I want to switch from a LastPass to Dashlane. How can I transfer those in a secure way? Saving them to an encrypted file is not a good idea. And so they're trying to find a standardized approach to that. So right now, you can't really exchange between different systems, but there's active work underway to try and address that.
Waiting for a day we could export passwords from a password manager and import them into another one. That would save a lot of time to a lot of people, I guess.
Yep.
Okay. A question for Marcin, who already mentioned this, because this is something we have not covered so far, and this is also very interesting, is the context of authorization. Because mostly we talk about contextless so far processes. What about the context in authorization and how the passwordless word, the passkeys apply to that?
So as far as I'm concerned, it's still not ready. So if you, let's give a context for this transaction context. So if you want to send you want to authorize banking transaction, you not only need to prove that you are you, but you want to say that I'm approving this particular transaction, right? So I'm sending this amount of money to this person. And many people were confused where those banks mentioned earlier, they've introduced support for U2F keys. And then they had this realization, okay, but still, will I just accept those transactions completely being blind? That defeats the purpose. That's like even those SMS, infamous SMS-based tokens are better because they give you context. So I was thinking if it's feasible, and I think it is, because you already there is a context. If you initiate a FIDO transaction, there is a part when you schedule the transaction to your either operating system or to your browser, and as long as you have trust that your browser, your operating system has not been compromised, you can have certainty that what you see is something that you authorize with. So I'm talking about all those pop-ups that are invoked when you conduct FIDO-based authentication. They can be extended, but again, this is if your system gets compromised, I think those may be altered. I remember Google had, I've noted it somewhere, Android protected confirmation. It was like a micro operating system inside operating system. And I recall there was a video when they were operating an insulin pump. So and so you could control your insulin pump from your Android, and you didn't want this transaction to be compromised by, even if the phone was rooted. So the context was being passed to the secure enclave, or this kind of separated sandbox the environment, where you could actually do this double click like you do with Apple Pay when you intentionally conduct this authorization. And that might be a way, but to have the context and then authorize. But still, it's not like an out-of-band authorization that you have. Sometimes you may have. I think it's a complex issue. If not, it would have been deployed already. I don't know, David. What do you think? You have this insider knowledge about it. So, and
well, generally, when you start getting to authorization, the key is you need more data, right? And so the authentication is, can I unlock the door? The authorization is, what am I allowed to do when I'm in there? And there's some standardization work going on to come up with common ways of providing trusted data, and it's called verified credentials. And by binding or providing that kind of information, perhaps during the authentication ceremony or right after, you can then add value or add information that can then help with authorization decisions. So at this point, the protocol for doing that is not yet standardized, but there is work on a standardized way of providing that kind of extra information.
Yep. So looks like there's still a lot of work in the standards area. So not going out of job anytime soon, I guess. But we have plenty of questions from our listeners, and there are excellent questions I want to ask. I'll merge two of them because Michał is asking what happens if he loses his passkey, and Rafał is asking, will it be possible to upgrade a passkey, like moving from a shorter key to a longer key, etc.? Is this anything standardized in these two areas, or it's more like implementation dependent, depending on the vendor actually?
So in terms of recreating a passkey for whatever reason, it's really just a repeat of the registration process. And so in the same horrible way, some replying parties used to force you to change your password every 90 days, and they'd pop that screen up. A relying party can pop up a similar screen, which should just be a single click to say, create a new passkey, and you do your biometric and you're done. So it's, you don't have to come up with all those complex letters and such. So it would be a similar process to that. And by doing a new registration, the relying party can set new parameters, including stronger cryptography. So it's actually a very simple step, but generally one that either a user could ask for in the same way you can say change password, or the relying party can trigger if it thinks it's appropriate.
But what if you lose your passkey? Assuming I don't trust Apple, I don't want to synchronize it to my keychain. I have it on my iPhone, and I lose that iPhone, and I was not careful enough to make any local backups as well. Does it mean I should lose my accounts that were protected by it?
So you asked a little while ago about disadvantages. That would be one.
Yeah, you have to fall back to the weaker solutions, like SMS-based password, but then you become a target of those old methods, right? You may become a target for switching.
I also have plenty of alternative authorization methods active on many of my accounts where I have hardware keys implemented as well. So I understand the pain, and addressing that risk is a compromise always.
One thing that I thought that could be useful, and for such a recovery, I was thinking about was the same mnemonic seed. I think that's what it's called. This 16-word 16 words that you could recreate your private key like you do with Bitcoin, right? You can write it down, put it in the safe, and that's gonna be, or you can actually set divide it into two and hide it in separate locations, and then someone can dictate it over the phone. People do it with Bitcoin, and if that was like a master master key that you could use to recover access.
Yeah, lower your security to improve backup recovery.
I think that there's a room for startups to jump onto that, and there's a lot of startups building on top of FIDO, and maybe it's one of the way to deal with those issues.
Gents, we're slowly approaching the end of the meeting. While it's really interesting, I want to cover at least one other topic that actually is obvious and not being covered at all, in my opinion, or I have insufficient knowledge. You mentioned asymmetrical cryptography. We've got private key, we've got a public key. Why we're not using it yet to encrypt our messengers, our emails? Why can't I just use it to I don't know, sign my Signal messages? Is there any way any way forward in this area, or this is just out of scope of FIDO Alliance? Why are we not using this technology for encryption? That would be so great if I already have assuming I have the passkey on my iPhone, I want to use it in my iMessage, I want to use it in Wicker, I want to use it in Telegram, I want to use it in Signal. What I'm missing to do this? Is it the future, or it's not yet?
Well, what you're sort of talking about is a peer-to-peer type of situation. And you've got two choices. You've got, symmetric cryptography or asymmetric, but in both cases, there needs to be a ceremony between the two parties in advance. And that's the biggest challenge. And it's a pairwise thing. So I do one with Marcin, I do one with you. We exchange public keys perhaps, or we exchange symmetric keys. That's a high cost, a transaction cost, if you've got to do that with everybody. So that, I think, is the major barrier to doing it. I mean, there was PGP a few years ago, and everyone had their email and put their public key at the bottom of their email, and it's not a really consumer-friendly approach to doing things.
Yeah, the PGP is the greatest example of a greatest encryption technology that nobody knew how to use properly.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
even the experts.
Yeah,
that's right.
My 2 cents. FIDO was designed to be to create digital signatures, not to encrypt. So the keys and the algorithms are used for digital signatures. I know that there are extensions like Max Secret, I believe, that you can use to negotiate Diffie-Hellman keys. So then yourself and the relying party can share a secret that you can then use without actually exchanging that secret. Then you can use to encrypt and decrypt using symmetric cryptography. That doesn't solve the problem that you yourself, Adam and David has mentioned, that end-to-end encryption take place. I think this is challenging. I remember Moxie Marlinspike has joined Twitter to do exactly what he did for Signal, and he failed. Right? He's I don't know how many years he spent, like 2 or 3 years doing this in Twitter. Probably there are more to just technical restrictions. Twitter was different when it comes to data, like messaging sovereignty back then. But so the ability for the platform to read stuff, etc., probably affected that. But that's it.
I'm not losing all hope, because I know that there's some like new wave messengers, like I don't know, Session or other niche very secure messengers that require you to actually manually input your other party key, or you just tap the two phones physically and then you exchange the keys. So there's space for implementing encryption based on passkeys, at least the cryptographic material that's there. But adding one more question from Michał again. Can we have multiple passkeys tied to one person, one account, one identity, or is it's more like one-to-one relationship assumed?
No, you can have multiple passkeys associated with the particular account. So for example, he's talking about 2 YubiKeys. So absolutely, yes. And that's where you get your account recovery. If you've lost one, you've registered the second one. For the same account, I might use, the passkey using Windows Hello on my laptop to log into that. But I might also use a YubiKey as a backup, a more secure backup as well. So yes, you can have multiple keys registered with one site.
Okay, so the last question I can see in the chat is somebody asking about the support for FIDO on Ubuntu devices, and in general the a little bit not so much popular devices and technologies as the other ones that have already been mentioned in this program. David, can you answer that?
Badly. It would be great to see support on Ubuntu, but the problem, of course, is that the drivers for that are different. It's more community deciding to do it, and somebody kind of, whether in a corporate environment or not, deciding to write the libraries for that. I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen some come along yet. Because you've got a lot of people use Linux boxes and such for their development work. So there's a lot of high value work being done on Linux machines in general, but it doesn't have the same pressure behind it as we have from the other large platform vendors.
I believe the question was, you can think of this question in 2 ways: either authenticating to Ubuntu device or like to the workstation, and it's a different set of challenges, and or using Ubuntu with use Ubuntu to connect to other applications, and then like support for setup in Ubuntu, I believe, and I think the latter works. The first example, so authenticating directly to Ubuntu, is as far as I'm concerned, as David said, is not available yet. But
actually, you can do OpenSSH.
Yeah.
To log in. That does support FIDO. They've added that to their library. So that's the one sort of exception. So yeah, the access to the machine has a little bit of support.
I know there's a challenge when you want to authenticate to workstations, and I don't know if it's a requirement from FIDO. You need to support offline connection. So you have to have this resident credentials, so they are called. So it's not like a traditional ceremony that you validate your credentials online, but your device will have to deal with your key. You have to deal with the device directly, and it had to actually store the credentials on the key, which is not obvious. Most of the identities are not stored on a key. They're like doesn't matter. But that's a different set of problem.
Okay, so to close the meeting, one last question from Carol, and also a very interesting one around privacy. Can we be sure that websites will not be able to correlate users based on their passkeys?
The short answer is yes, and that's by design. Every time you register with a site, it creates a unique key pair. So when I register one with Facebook, I get one key pair with its own public key. When I register then with Gmail, it's a new key pair with a different public key, so that if Facebook and Google were to collude, what a terrifying thought, were to collude, they wouldn't be able to recognize that it's the same person. So yes, that privacy aspect is in the protocol by design.
And there's another thing that you cannot track devices. The key cannot be trackable. So for even when you attestate the key, it only gives you a number of batch. So there's no way to just ask, okay, what's your key number, and then you can correlate it from different vendor. It's completely forbidden. And I believe the minimum amount of keys in a batch is 100,000, or maybe it has changed. So you can pinpoint to the batch, but you cannot pinpoint a specific device.
Okay, so we've haven't run out of topics to talk about, because we could spend the whole day covering all the aspects of this the new technology. We've run out of the questions from the chat. I hope I've seen them all and we've answered them all. Thank you, guys. I've learned a lot today, and I hope our listeners did as well. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed, as David showed us today a few times, for progress, for faster progress today. We see that everything's actually ready to be implemented and to roll out to the masses. And I hope that when we repeat this meeting in a year or two, we'll be also already using this technology like in 50% of accounts we have. And keeping my fingers really strongly crossed for that. So thank you, guys, and see you probably next time.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's been a great talk.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Adam. It was really a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.